Section 9 of Warriors of Old Japan and Other Stories by Yei Theodora Ozaki. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dai Yong, The Story of Benkei, Sequel to The Story of Yoshitsune, Part 1. Those who have read the story of the great warrior Yoshitsune will certainly remember that his retainer Benkei was a gigantic bonze, as remarkable for his physical strength as he was for his original character. In the story of Yoshitsune, very little was said about Benkei. You may therefore like to hear something more about the famous man who is so favorite a hero with Japanese children and so greatly respected in Japan for his faithfulness to his master. Benkei was the son of a Buddhist priest named Bensho, high steward of the temple of Gongen at Kumano, a famous shrine from ancient times, and his mother was a daughter of a high court official of the second rank. Benkei was no ordinary mortal. Most children come into the world within 10 months, but Benkei kept his mother waiting 1 year and 6 months for him, and when he was born he already had teeth and a luxuriant growth of hair, and was so strong and big that he could walk from the first as well as most children of 2 or 3 years of age. Seeing how extraordinarily big and strong he was, the family were lost in amazement, but their wonder quickly changed to dismay, for the mother died soon after giving birth to her son. The father, Bensho, was very angry at this, and took an aversion to the child who had brought, he said, so great a misfortune upon him. He even wished to abandon the boy altogether, believing that, as Benkei's birth had cost his mother's life, he would in after years only prove a curse to the family. Now the boy's aunt, who was married to a man named Yamanoi, hearing this, pitied her little nephew Benkei, and going to her brother said, "If you are going to treat the child so cruelly as to cast him away, please give him to me. I have no children, and will bring him up as my own child. He is not responsible for his mother's death. It is fate, and there is no help for it." Bensho consented to her taking the child, saying that he did not care what happened to him so long as he was kept out of his sight, for he could no longer bear to see him. So Benkei was adopted by his aunt, who took him away to the capital of Kyoto. The child rewarded her care and grew to be a fine boy beyond all expectation. He was exceedingly strong and healthy. At 5 or 6 years of age he was equal in size and strength to boys of 10 or 12, and gave promise of unusual intelligence and cleverness. Unfortunately, his face was as fierce as that of a demon, and he looked so truly savage and ugly that he gradually earned for himself the nickname of Oniwaka, or Demon Youth. In a few years, his uncle thought that it was time to send the boy to school, and he accordingly sent Benkei to the monastery of Eizan and placed him under the tutorship of the famous priest Benkei. In Japan, as in England in those times, all learning was in the hands of the priests, and the temples were the only schools. When Benkei arrived at Benkei's temple, he was taught the reading and writing of Chinese characters, and he was at first docile and diligent, and obedient to all set over him. He made rapid progress, and not only satisfied but pleased his teacher, who commended his industry. But after a time he chafed at the restraint of his new surroundings, and began to give trouble. Not content with being unruly himself, he would lead the other novices away from their studies into the mountains, and play all kinds of rough games with them, and of course, being by nature much stronger and bigger than any of them, none of his companions could stand against him. It therefore happened that in every contest he invariably gained the victory, and this elated him so much that he thought of nothing but his sports and his triumphs, and, neglecting his lessons entirely, practiced athletic games day after day, quite forgetting everything else. Oniwaka's teacher, Benkei, hearing about the youth's wild doings, and considering them as unseemly, sent for him and told him that such behavior not only grieved his guardians, but brought disgrace upon the holy temple. But his rebuke fell upon deaf ears, and did no good at all. While he was being scolded, Benkei listened respectfully enough, but as soon as the reverend teacher turned his back, he would forthwith be as wild, if not wilder, than ever. His conduct grew worse and worse, till at last, losing all patience, the master priest forbade him to go out of the house, and then enforced his order by shutting him up in a monastery. This punishment Oniwaka deeply resented, and one night, eluding the vigilance of his jailers, he stole out quietly, and picking up a great log of wood, began to destroy everything he could. First he smashed the gateway, then the fences all round the temple. Then he broke the shutters and the sliding screens inside. Indeed, everything he could reach he wrecked. The bonzes, roused from their slumbers by the unexpected noise, which sounded as if a troop of robbers were at work, were all so frightened that they could do nothing to stop the whirlwind of destruction. When Oniwaka had done all the mischief he could, he felt that, after this last mad prank, the temple of Eizan was no place for him, so he fled from the spot forever. He was now just 17 years of age, and he called himself Musashi Bo Benkei. Oniwaka showed a sense of humor when he called himself Musashi Bo Benkei. In olden times, there lived in Eizan a man named Musashi, who was turbulent and wild in his youth, and yet became a famous bonze and lived until the ripe age of 61. Oniwaka, having heard about this famous man, made up his mind to be like him, and therefore called himself Musashi Bo, or Musashi the Bonze. The first syllable, Ben, of Benkei, was taken from the first character of his father's name, Bensho, and the second, Kei, was the last syllable of his teacher's name, Kwankei. The name Benkei was, therefore, a combination of the names of his father and teacher. Ashamed to return home to his uncle and aunt after his behavior at the monastery, Benkei made up his mind to travel. This he did much after the fashion of German apprentices at about the same period in Europe. Leaving Kyoto, he came to Osaka. From Osaka he went to the province of Awa in the island of Shikoku. He then traveled all through that island, and thence wandered back to the mainland, where, in the province of Harima, he came at last to a monastery called Shossa. This monastery was as large as that of Eizan, and Benkei thought that he would like to stay there for a time as a student. With the consent of the abbot, Benkei was enrolled as an acolyte of this temple. Among the numerous novices in the temple, there was one named Kaien, who was nearly as fond of mischief as Benkei himself, and he was known in the neighborhood for a troublesome fellow, no one young or old being safe from his foolish pranks. One day soon after Benkei's arrival, Kaien found the newcomer taking a nap, so for fun, he wrote on Benkei's cheek the Chinese character for geta, or clog. When Benkei woke up and went into the courtyard, he noticed that everybody he came near seemed to be laughing at him, though nobody would say why. Thinking that there must be something strange in his appearance, he glanced into a bowl of water, and at once discovered the cause of the merriment. Angry at the trick played on him, he seized a thick stick and rushing into the midst of his fellow novices shouted, "You rogues! I suppose you thought that you were doing something clever when you scribbled on my face. Now just come here one by one, and kneel down and beg my pardon. If you do not, you will soon be sorry for yourselves." Benkei looked so angry and spoke so fiercely that most of the acolytes were frightened. 4 or 5 of the boldest, however, answered him back, saying, "What do you mean, you lazy fellow, by complaining about a trick played upon you while you were asleep in the middle of the day? If we hear any more of your grumbling, we will throw you out of the monastery." In this way they tried to frighten Benkei, but he did not budge an inch, and his only reply was to lift his stick and knock down the 4 or 5 who had spoken. Seeing this, Kaien, the author of all this trouble, rushed up, saying, "You are a coward to attack fellows half your size. Suppose for a change you fight with me." Then, looking round for a weapon, and seeing a large log of wood on a fire close by, he picked it up and faced the enraged Benkei, adding, "It was I who scribbled on your face. If you are angry, come on and let us fight it out." The two closed at once and fought for some time. Then Benkei grew impatient, and seizing Kaien by his collar and belt, lifted him off his feet. The other novices, seeing this, cried out in alarm, "Kaien has been lifted off his feet. He can't fight now. He's helpless." Then they shouted to Kaien to apologize and save himself. "Pardon! Pardon, Benkei! Mercy!" screamed the youth, now bitterly repenting his folly. Benkei, however, did not hear Kaien's cry for mercy, for he was like a madman now. He hardly knew what he did or said, for his blood was fired by the taunts of the young men and by the fight. "You shall die!" screamed Benkei. "Mannerless coward that you are, you shall die, I say, and your carcass shall be eaten by crows." With these words he shook Kaien as mercilessly as a dog does a rat, and then flung him upon the tiled roof of the chapel, a height of some 14 or 15 feet. Kaien fell on the roof, rolled down the tiles, and at last, striking a rock in the garden, was killed on the spot. When the foolish and unfortunate lad was flung up on the roof by Benkei, he still held the smoking brand, which he had all to no purpose used against his antagonist, and this, falling on the building, flared up and set fire to the temple. Just then a breeze sprang up and fanned the flames into a fierce blaze. Sparks from the roof dropped upon the curving tiers of the 5-storied pagoda, and the main gateway, and the school, and the houses of the bonzes, till the whole of the monastery was in a blaze. Seeing the conflagration, all the inmates were lost in consternation, shouting, "Fire! Fire!" Some of them ran to draw water from the well, while others threw sand on the flames, and in the excitement and general confusion which followed, Benkei, the cause of the calamity, was forgotten. In the midst of the tremendous tumult and disturbance, Benkei laughed quietly to himself. "Ha ha!" he laughed. "Look at the fire and the stir I have made. I have never seen the lazy bonzes know what it is to hurry before. It will do them good for once in a way." Then he slipped away from the temple and made his way back to Kyoto. Benkei, wild and unruly as he was, cannot be judged by the standard of conduct of today. Those times were very different from these days of peace and order. Young men were encouraged to do rough violent deeds to show their strength and courage, and if they killed their antagonists in the fight, so much more did this redound to their credit. It was the custom for a young samurai on obtaining a sword to go out into the highways to try the metal of his blade. Woe to those who passed by! Their blood must baptize the knight's sword. This training bred a martial spirit in the youth of Japan, and produced brave men of dauntless courage and resolution like Benkei, who became such a hero in after life. Benkei was, however, by this time tired of study and living the dull life of a bonze, and he now made up his mind to rove about in search of adventures, determining that, should he find a stronger man than himself, he would become that man's vassal, turn from his wild ways, and lead the life of a good samurai, faithful to his lord and a good patriot to his country. But first of all, he must find the man stronger than he to whom he would bow his proud strong neck. He longed now to find a master worthy of respect, whom he could reverence as his superior. How was this to be done? At last an idea struck him. He had determined to be a soldier and enter the service of a samurai. He must, therefore, get a good sword. Violent and impetuous as ever, to this end he now vowed to take 1,000 swords from the citizens of Kyoto. To carry out his wild scheme, he went nightly to the Gojo Bridge, and when men passed along bearing swords in their girdles, he would rush suddenly out, attack them furiously, and snatch away their swords. He never pursued those who ran away, for he deemed them cowards, and would not waste his time or strength on such creatures. But those who opposed him he would mow down with a single sweep of his great halberd. In this way he had attacked 999 men and taken away 999 swords. Each time he had hoped to meet his match in the numerous contests, but not one among the whole number proved a serious foe. Accordingly, the swords Benkei had thus collected were all poor weapons, for weak men have like swords. They were blunt and badly tempered, and of not the slightest use to him. He was heartily disappointed, and began to think that perhaps he had better abandon the enterprise as a vain one. In desperation, however, he determined to get one more sword, and thus complete the total of 1,000 blades, the number he had first of all set his mind upon. In spite of discouragement, he told himself that it would be stupid to give up at this point. As soon as he decided to do this, his spirits revived, and for some unaccountable reason, he felt that this time he would be lucky and able to secure once for all a good weapon. He waited impatiently for the evening, and as soon as the twilight fell he made his preparations and went as usual to the Gojo Bridge. It happened to be the night of the 15th day of August, and the beautiful harvest moon sailed up into the serene heaven above the hills and the tall dark velvety pines and cryptomerias, and the sleeping world was bathed in her soft silvery brilliance. For a long time Benkei stood leaning against the parapet of the bridge, entranced by the fair scene spread out before him in the moonlight, and apparently quite forgetful for the time being of his purpose. Suddenly, the stillness of the beautiful night was broken by the sound of a flute. Benkei started from his reverie. The music drew nearer and nearer, and then he saw a slight figure approaching from the other end of the bridge. The newcomer wore a kind of white veil and high black lacquered clogs, and was playing on his flute as he strolled along. Benkei watched the approaching stranger, and saw at once that this was no ordinary passer-by. At first he thought that this must be a woman, for the moonlight revealed a slender grace in walking, and then, on nearer view, a face of extreme youth and aristocratic beauty. He could not find the heart to attack the mysterious and gentle unknown, and decided to let him or her pass unmolested. But while he was wondering who the person, so unlike all the others he had met on the bridge, could be, the supposed lady all of a sudden stepped up to Benkei and kicked the latter's halberd out of his hand. "What are you doing?" shouted Benkei, in a rage when he had recovered from his astonishment, and, recovering his halberd, he pulled off what he supposed to be the lady's veil. To his surprise he found that the adventurous stranger was a handsome youth who might easily be mistaken for a girl, and then Benkei's eyes fell upon a splendid gold-mounted sword, which the lad carried in his girdle. He said to himself that he had not waited so long in vain, that he was verily in luck this night to have such a bird come into net. While these thoughts flashed through his mind, Benkei clutched at the sword, but the youth was far stronger than he looked, and the instant Benkei put forth his hand, the young fellow flung a heavy fan in his face, saying, "How brave you think yourself, don't you?" and darted out of his reach. This made Benkei more angry than ever, and with threatening exclamations he lifted his halberd to deal a smashing blow on the young knight. But the lad was far too quick for Benkei, and sprang about with the nimbleness of a monkey, and no matter how Benkei aimed his blows, they never reached the mark. Never had Benkei seen such agility and adroitness. Sometimes the youth appeared in front, and sometimes behind, now on one side and again on the other, and as often as Benkei turned, he would find that his opponent had shifted his position like lightning. At length Benkei grew tired, and a sense of awe began to take hold of his mind, for he now felt that the youth must be a supernatural being, or a Tengu, and no common mortal, and this feeling grew upon him so strongly that he began to lose heart. He knew now that he was no longer invincible, as he had hitherto been. Then the lad, who had hitherto acted on the defensive, began to push his advantage, and, attacking Benkei in good earnest, beat down the latter's guard and disarmed him. When the redoubtable Benkei, who had never yet been beaten by anyone in his whole life, found himself thus ignominiously defeated, he was astonished beyond words, and there and then, kneeling down on the bridge, bowed low before the young man, and humbly said, "Will you condescend to tell me whose son you are, and your name? Something tells me that you are no common man." The handsome youth laughed and replied, "I am the 8th and youngest son of Minamoto Yoshitomo, and my name is Minamoto Ushiwaka." And with these words he allowed Benkei to rise. "What do I hear?" exclaimed Benkei. "Are you indeed the young knight Minamoto Ushiwaka, of whom I have heard so much? I felt from the first that you were a person of distinction. As for myself, I am simply Musashibo Benkei. For a long time I have been looking for a man stronger than myself, to whom I could look up as my master. I have led a wild life for a long time, but if you will take me into your service, I will be a good and faithful vassal." Ushiwaka, who had heard of Benkei's remarkable strength, and who had come out that night to the Gojo Bridge for the purpose of meeting the notorious man with the hope of winning him to his side, was delighted at the turn events had taken, and promised to take Benkei into his service, and in this way the brave youth and the giant priest became associated as lord and vassal. End of section 9.